Hello everyone, my name is Bulko and today we are going to talk about ability scores in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and how that translates to Baldur's Gate 3. So ability scores are the primary attributes of your character and they pretty well determine what your character is good at and what they're not so good at. So ability scores are definitely one of the places where you can easily mess up. And a lot of times people will feel like, oh shoot, I made a mistake, and they'll get to the end of the introduction section of the game and they're like, oh, I need to reroll my character, create a new character. So hopefully, if you watch this video and you understand how the system works, I can save you a little bit of time and you'll feel confident that you've made some good decisions. I'm not necessarily here to advocate for min-maxing or making the ultimate character or the perfect build, but it's more about explaining how the system works so you can make informed decisions for yourself. So to start off, let's talk a little bit about this score system. So we're using point buy in Baldur's Gate 3, which means we're not rolling dice. You have 27 points that you're assigning to your ability scores, and it starts off at 8. So if we tick all these down, they go to 8. And you'll notice I have 2 scores that won't go to 8 because of my racial bonuses. In the full release of the game, you'll have a +2 and a +1 that you could assign to any particular score you want. So it's going to look a little bit different, but I'm making a rogue right now, and I decided to be a strong heart halfling, which is going to give me a dex and constitution bonus, which is exactly what I'm looking for my rogue. So this is probably what I would pick anyways. So I have my 27 points, and now I need to put these into my scores. But let's talk a little bit about what the numbers mean. So you have this number on the right, and you have this number on the left. So the bigger number here represents what your actual ability score is, so 8, 10, 9, etc. And the number on the left is the modifier. This is what gets added to your roll. So if I'm rolling a d20 for my strength check, my character currently has no strength, so he would have a penalty. And that just gets subtracted to the roll. So you'll notice if I put 1 more point into strength, it doesn't really change anything. But if I put 2 points into strength, it's an even number and it goes up. And generally what happens above 10 is every 2 points, it goes up 1. And I can't go beyond 15 at level 1. Without my racial bonuses, that is. So you're really looking for even numbers when you're going for positive scores. And when you're going for negative scores, you're really looking also for even numbers because there's no point in having a 9 because these are all wasted points. So if you're going to drop a stat, generally speaking, you're going to want to have it be an 8. And if you're going to increase your stats, you generally want an even number. But there are a few exceptions to that. So let's just hit this recommended button, which gets you a pretty good start. But obviously, if we're looking for sort of even numbers, there's a problem because we have a 17, a 15, and a 13, and I can drop all these, and essentially I have 5 wasted points with this recommended build. Now, there are some things you can do to make sure or make an optimized character that does use odd scores at level 1, but really there's a few situations you want. As a general rule, the way I like to make a character is I either have no odd numbers at level 1 odd number at level 1, or 2 odd numbers at level 1. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward, is because the way you increase the ability points, they happen at level 4, at level 8, and at level 12 of a particular class. So if you're multi-classing, you might not get as many ability score increases as other classes. Another exception is Fighter that gets bonus ability score increases at level 6, etc., and then level 10, I believe. So you'd get a couple more if you're going straight Fighter. But the problem is you get to pick either an ability score increase at those thresholds or you get to pick a feat. And feats can be really, really powerful. Some of the most powerful builds in the game rely on feats, which can be covered in another video. But long story short, there are a few feats that let you take 1 ability score increase instead of 2 ability score increases, which is the default. So for example, let's say I wanted to make a strength-based character and I had a start of 15 strength, and I wanted to bump this up to 16 at level 4, and I had the ability to take heavy armor mastery. I could get my +1 strength for heavy armor mastery, and then I could bump up my strength a little bit. So heavy armor master is something that is a feat that gives +1 strength as well as 3 damage resistance when wearing heavy armor. And If I knew I wanted to take that, I wouldn't take it on a rogue, obviously, because I'm not wearing heavy armor. But if I did want a character that was taking something like that, I could have one score be an odd number, knowing a feat that I was going to take at level 4 that was going to bump me up to that next threshold and go from there. The other thing you can do right away at level 4 is instead of putting your 2 points into one ability score, you can put 2 points or 1 point into two different ability scores. So a strategy could be something like this, maybe. Let's see if we can make a prettier looking number and make it actually useful. So I have 3. We could do something like that, which is not a terrible score for a rogue. So I have my 17 dexterity, which gives me that +3 at level 1. I have my +2 for my constitution, and I have my +2 for wisdom because I want my rogue to be able to actually perceive things. So I decided to bump up the wisdom a little bit. Now, because I have these two odd numbers, once I hit level 4, I'm going to bump this up to my 18, and I'm going to bump this up to 16. So I'm going to be a pretty durable little halfling. So having that sort of foresight, knowing that I have two scores I'm going to bump up, or I'm going to have the one score. So like I might just have this 16, and this is going to give me a little bit more flexibility because it's easy. You get more points if you're spreading them out, if you're not really min-maxing, and that might let me be a little bit more of a jack of all trades. Maybe I'll still dump strength a little bit, but I'll get a little bit of charisma, a little bit of intelligence, and then my rogue really is going to be sort of that skill monkey character that's going to be decent at everything, right? So this is the kind of decisions you can make if you really want to focus and specialize. And really all I'm trading if I do an ability score array like this is the +1 constitution by level 4, because I'm still going to be able to bump my dexterity up to 18. So this is where, depending on what you're looking for in your character and the kind of roles you want your character to fill, it isn't necessary to completely invest into a single, completely maximizing a single stat. You could potentially get more overall points by spreading out a little bit, but it really comes down to personal preference. Let's talk about the big picture in terms of the individual ability scores in Baldur's Gate 3. So first up, we have strength, which is going to determine your melee attack and damage rolls. And it's also going to determine how far you can jump, how much you can carry, how much you can shove or how effective you are at shoving, and your resistance to being shoved, and your strength saving throws, which are going to be for things like the spell Entangle. It should be noted here that unlike the tabletop version where bull rushing or grappling takes your action, in Baldur's Gate 3, shoving is a bonus action, which opens up some really fun tactical combat options, as well as being able to jump around in the environments can actually really give your character a lot of mobility, especially using spells like jump, which I don't know if I've ever seen cast at the table. They really open up some cool tactical flanking options in Baldur's Gate 3. So having a high strength is actually pretty useful in a lot of situations. And things like carry weight and just those quality of life things are always nice to have at least one strength character to be a pack mule. So not something to be completely overlooked, but typically a lot of people, especially if you're coming from Dungeons and Dragons, you're probably going to think about dexterity as the king stat, which it usually is and still kind of is in Baldur's Gate 3, because dexterity determines your range attack and damage rolls, your melee attack and damage rolls with finesse weapons, so rapiers, short swords, and daggers. It also determines your armor class when you're wearing medium or light armor, and it also affects your initiative, and it also gives you proficient, or it also affects some of the most common skills in the game through stealth and sleight of hand. And then if that wasn't enough, it also is tied to dexterity saving throws, which are one of the most common saving throws in the game, because that's going to help you dodge things like fireball. So dexterity does so many things, and I think initiative especially can't be undersold in a game like Dungeons and Dragons where action economy is everything, because being able to go first in initiative can literally mean taking a turn or not, because oftentimes in this edition of Dungeons and Dragons, combat is determined somewhere between the round 2 and 3, which means that if you act first, you're going to have 3 turns compared to 2 turns in an average combat. So really you're getting, on average like 50% more turns by having a higher initiative. So it's really really powerful in the typical fight. Not every fight is going to only be 3 turns, but just generally how it plays out, you might have some cleanup to do, as it were. But really, once you nova and take out the most threatening enemies, that happens in the first couple of turns. So thinking about dexterity and all the things it gives your character, it's really really useful. And just because it does determine initiative and armor class, you're not really going to want to dump this on any character. Next, Constitution. So Constitution is another stat that every character likes and nobody's going to want to completely dump, because this determines your hit points. So Constitution is HP pretty well straight across the board. Every modifier you have is just multiplied by your level, and that's how many bonus hit points you get. It's really useful. In addition, just like is for dexterity, Constitution is one of the most common saving throws. This is going to give you resistance, or sorry, it's going to be it will determine how effective you are at resisting poisons, and some of the most nasty spells in the game, things that'll like turn you to stone, and poison gas clouds and that kind of stuff. So Constitution is a really common saving throw, and some of the things it can save you from can be really debilitating. So even if you're not worried about getting hit too often and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be my wizard in the back, I don't need Constitution. Wrong, because additionally, for casters, Constitution saving throws determine your ability to maintain concentration on spells when you take damage. So Constitution is actually super important for casters, and it's super important for frontline characters, and it's super important for skirmishers that are going to potentially be attacked as they're flanking. So every character cares about Constitution. Next, we have Intelligence. Now we're into a dump stat. There's one class that really cares about this, and it's Wizards. Yes, there are subclasses, so the Arcane Trickster and Rogue and the Eldritch Knight and Fighter, that also care about intelligence. And there are quite a few skills, so sometimes a Bard or non-Arcane Trickster Rogue will have a little bit of intelligence to make advantage of some of these skills that they otherwise wouldn't get. But you need to think about, what is your character actually doing? So if you're a wizard, you want your intelligence really high. Otherwise, most classes can safely dump this. It really only affects skills if you're not a wizard. Very few classes have any benefit for having intelligence, and it doesn't really affect much. It's mostly sort of knowledge, arcana-based things, history, religion, that kind of stuff. Next is Wisdom, which it is another sort of mental stat, but unlike intelligence, is useful on more characters for a few things that aren't necessarily listed here. Obviously, it is a primary stat for a number of classes. So clerics and druids use it as their casting stat. Monks use it as a primary stat. It's going to give them bonuses to armor and a bunch of their abilities. Rangers also use it as a casting stat, but they can kind of get away with having a little bit less. And any scout wants a little bit of wisdom, because wisdom also gives you perception checks, which is one of the most important things for spotting hidden stuff. So wisdom is not necessarily going to be dumped on any sort of scout character. So, and both dexterity and constitution, wisdom also affects a really important saving throw, your wisdom saving throw. And wisdom saving throws generally protect you against things that completely debilitate or remove your character from combat. So the types of mind control and charm spells that can actually turn your frontline fighter against the party. So having a really good wisdom save is actually important on pretty well every character, and everybody likes finding secrets. So wisdom is usually not dumped as much as something like intelligence or even something like charisma. So charisma is the primary spellcasting attribute of bards, sorcerers, warlocks, and paladins, even though it's not listed here. It also influences all your social skills, so your ability to deceive or persuade or intimidate, all that kind of stuff. Now, another bonus that's listed here, you'll see, is it influences your traders' prices. So unlike in Dungeons and Dragons, where you have to haggle your DM and maybe make some checks, charisma can give you a little bit of extra coin in your pocket in Baldur's Gate 3. So another little difference from the game. And it does also affect saving throws. It should be noted that every single ability score potentially has a saving throw. It's not like older editions of Dungeons and Dragons where you just have reflex, will, and fortitude saves. Charisma is actually used to save against spells like Banishment, which is a really powerful control spell that takes your character completely out of combat, sends them to another plane of existence for a few turns. So it can be useful in a really niche scenario, but most of the time I haven't played the end game of Baldur's Gate 3 like nobody else has. And so we don't necessarily know what kind of spells are going to be thrown at us, but generally that's a very edge case. You're not really worried about charisma as an important saving throw to maintain, and unless you are playing the party face, you don't really care about having high perception or persuasion rather. And unless you're one of those listed classes or a paladin, you don't really need charisma. So this makes charisma alongside intelligence and strength. These are kind of the three most common dump stats. So now that we've talked about all the different ability scores and we've talked about what you should potentially be looking at in terms of having all even numbers, one odd number, or up to two odd numbers based on what you're planning to do with your feats or your ability score increases, let's just give a brief overview of sort of some of your goals for making a first level character. So for me personally, I'm always looking at taking this starred attribute, whatever my class is, and getting that starred attribute to at least 16. So whether you're a spellcaster or a frontline fighter or a striker, whatever you're trying to do with your character, I always want to have my main stat, whatever I'm going to be doing my like bread and butter attack rolls with, needs to be a 16 at level 1 for me personally. And then from there, I like to have 12 to 14 constitution, depending on how much of a frontline character I'm going to be. If you're more ranged or more in the back, you can feel free to drop this a little bit lower. You might be able to get away with it. Like something like a rogue, even though you're not necessarily in the front line being a tank up in the enemy's face, because a lot of times you are going to be melee or like flanking from the sides. I actually do like having a little bit more constitution on my rogues because they tend to still get targeted a little bit. And then from there, it's really what you want to do in terms of your subclass and like long-term game plan. So I've statted this character out to be more of a skill monkey, somebody who's going to have good perception, somebody who could potentially be a party face depending on how they spend their expertise. I wouldn't necessarily take these, although these are great for my scout. And I will sort of make some decisions there. But being a rogue, you really only need high dex and then maybe a little bit of con, and then everything else you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to stat out your character. If I was going to go for an arcane trickster, I might consider something like this, or I might even do something like this, and be really focused in on being that arcane trickster, where at level 4 I would be taking my dexterity to 18 and my intelligence to 16, and that would still give me some moderate spell casting ability, as well as making sure I hit 18 at level 4, because that's another thing you really want to consider is how are you going to get to 18 in your main stat at level 4, because by level 12 ideally you want to have a 20. So a lot of classes could take 1 or 2 feats and hit that 20 threshold. If you're a fighter, you can potentially squeak in a couple more, but it really matters where you're going in the long term with this character. Fortunately, there is respecking later in the game in the release, I've been told, which means if you make some mistakes later on, you can totally change them. I don't even know, you might be able to go back and change your base ability scores, but I want to make this video talking about how you could set yourself up for success. So yeah, that has been probably way too long of a video talking about ability scores in Dungeons and Dragons. If you are still here, maybe you just really appreciate hearing somebody nerding out about D&D and you've been enjoying my ramblings, and if so, I super appreciate you. I'm definitely going to be making some more videos on Baldur's Gate 3. Let me know what you want me to talk about, and I will keep making up the content because I cannot wait to play this game, and this has been a great way to distract myself from the fact that it is not out yet. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.